1964, the book Visions of Order by Richard Weaver is published. He describes progressive educators as a revolutionary cabal engaged in a systematic attempt to undermine society's traditions and beliefs. 1967, Richard Nixon calls for New World Order. In Asia After Vietnam, in the October issue of Foreign Affairs, Nixon writes of nations' dispositions to evolve regional approaches to development needs and to the evolution of a new world order. 1968, Joy Elmer Morgan, former editor of the NEA, National Education Association Journal, publishes the book, The American Citizen's Handbook, in which he says, quote, "The coming of the United Nations and the urgent necessity that it evolve into a more comprehensive form of world government places upon the citizens of the United States an increased obligation to make the most of their citizenship, which now widens into active world citizenship," close quote. 1968, Nelson Rockefeller pledges support of the New World Order. In an Associated Press report, Rockefeller pledges that as president, he would work toward international creation of a new world order. 1970, education and the mass media promote world order. In Thinking About a New World Order for Decade 1990, author Ian Baldwin Jr. asserts, quote, "The World Law Fund has begun a worldwide research and educational program that will introduce a new emerging discipline, world order, into educational curricula throughout the world, and to concentrate some of its energies on bringing basic world order concepts into the mass media, again on a worldwide level," close quote. 1972, President Richard Nixon visits China. In his toast to Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, former CFR, Council on Foreign Relations member, and now President Nixon expresses, quote, "the hope that each of us has to build a new world order," close quote. 1972, Dr. Chester M. Pierce of Harvard University, in the keynote address to the Association for Childhood Education International in Denver, Colorado, states, quote, "Every child in America entering school at the age of 5 is insane because he comes to school with certain allegiances toward our founding fathers, toward his parents, toward a belief in a supernatural being, toward the sovereignty of this nation as a separate entity. It's up to you to make all of these sick children well," close quote. 1972, in speaking of the coming world government, Roy M. Ash, director of the Office of Management and Budget, declares, quote, "Within 2 decades, the institutional framework for a world economic community will be in place, and aspects of individual sovereignty will be given over to a supranational authority," close quote. 1972, Cecil Golden, former Florida Associate Commissioner of Education, writes in the Ledger, quote, "Like those assembling an atom bomb, very few of them understand what they're building and won't until we put all the parts together," close quote. 1973, the Trilateral Commission is established. Banker David Rockefeller organizes this new private body and chooses Zbigniew Brzezinski, later National Security Advisor to President Carter, as the commission's first director, and invites Jimmy Carter to become a founding member. 1973, the Humanist Manifesto 2 is published and states, quote, "The next century can be and should be the humanistic century. We stand at the dawn of a new age, a secular society on a planetary scale. As non-theists, we begin with humans, not God, nature, not deity. We deplore the division of humankind on nationalistic grounds. Thus, we look to the development of a system of world law and a world order based on transnational federal government. The true revolution is occurring," close quote. 1974, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, trilateralist, and CFR Council on Foreign Relations member Richard Gardner's article, "The Hard Road to World Order," is published in the CFR's Foreign Affairs magazine, where he states that, quote, "The house of world order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. But an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned frontal assault. Close quote. 1974, the World Conference of Religion for Peace, held in Louvain, Belgium, is held. Douglas Roche presents a report entitled, "We Can Achieve a New World Order." The UN calls for wealth redistribution. In a report entitled New International Economic Order, the UN General Assembly outlines a plan to redistribute the wealth from the rich to the poor nations. 1975, a study titled A New World Order is published by the Center of International Studies, Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Studies, Princeton University. 1975, retired Admiral Chester Ward, former Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Navy and former CFR member, writes in a critique that the goal of the CFR is the, quote, submergence of U.S. sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one-world government, close quote. 1975, Kissinger on the Couch is published. Authors Phyllis Schlafly and Admiral Chester Ward state, quote, once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the U.S. government should espouse a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of the CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy and to confound, discredit, intellectually and politically, any opposition, close quote. 1975, Seattle Post-Intelligence reports that Henry Kissinger said, quote, our nation is uniquely endowed to play a creative and decisive role in the new order which is taking form around us, close quote. 1976, RIO, Reshaping the International Order, is published by the Globalist Club of Rome, calling for a new international order, including an economic redistribution of wealth. 1976, the NEA, the National Education Association, unveils its plan of education for the New World Order under the name Goals 2000. The summary report of the NEA bicentennial program reveals its goals, quote, to change the course of American education for the 21st century by embracing the ideals of global community and the equality and interdependence of all peoples and nations, close quote. The NEA, National Education Association Earth Day curriculum has targeted 45 million public school children with what Mikhail Gorbachev has coined, quote, the cornerstone for the New World Order, close quote. The one world concept is not new. In 1946, the former NEA Journal editor Joy Elmer Morgan called the school, quote, the very heart, close quote, of world government. According to Forbes magazine, the 30-year decline in American education is directly linked with the rise of the NEA. Its escalating power has precisely matched the discouraging scenario of increased spending with worsening results. 1976, in Congress, 32 senators and 92 representatives signed a Declaration of Interdependence written by historian Henry Steele Commager. The declaration states that, quote, we must join with others to bring forth a new world order. Narrow notions of national sovereignty must not be permitted to curtail that obligation, close quote. Congresswoman Marjorie Holt refuses to sign the declaration, saying, quote, it calls for the surrender of our national sovereignty to international organizations. It declares that our economy should be regulated by international authorities. It proposes that we enter into a new world order, that we will redistribute the wealth created by the American people, close quote. 1977, the book The Third Try at World Order is published. Author Harlan Cleveland of the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies calls for, quote, changing Americans' attitudes and institutions, close quote, for, quote, complete disarmament, except for international soldiers, and for individual entitlement to food, health, and education, close quote. 1977, the book Imperial Brain Trust, by Lawrence Shoup and William Minter is published. The book takes a critical look at the Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR, with chapters such as Shaping a New World Order, the Council's Blueprint for Global Hegemony, 1939 through 1944, and Towards the 1980s, the Council's Plans for a New World Order, close quote. 1977, The Trilateral Connection appears in the July edition of Atlantic Monthly, written by Jeremiah Novak. It says, quote, "For the third time in this century, a group of American schools, businessmen, and government officials is planning to fashion a new world order," close quote. 1977, leading educator Mortimer Adler publishes the book Philosopher at Large, in which he says, quote, "If local civil government is necessary for local civil peace, then world civil government is necessary for world peace." I'm going to read that again. If local civil government is necessary for local civil peace, then world civil government is necessary for world peace, close quote. 1979, Barry Goldwater, retiring Republican senator from Arizona, publishes his autobiography called With No Apologies. He writes, quote, "In my view, the Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. All this is to be done in the interest of creating a more peaceful, more productive world community. What the trilateralists truly intend is the creation of a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation states involved. They believe the abundant materialism they propose to create will overwhelm existing differences. As managers and creators of the system, they will rule the future," close quote. 1980, Dr. James H. Billington, who received his doctorate as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, has taught at Harvard and Princeton universities, and is the Librarian of Congress, writes in his book entitled Fire in the Minds of Men, quote, "This book seeks to trace the origins of a faith, perhaps the faith of our time. But what is new is the belief that a perfect secular order will emerge from the forcible overthrow of traditional authority," close quote. 1984, the book Power to Lead is published. Author James McGregor Burns admits, quote, "The framers of the U.S. Constitution have simply been too shrewd for us. They've outwitted us. They designed separate institutions that cannot be unified by mechanical linkages, frail bridges, tinkering. If we are to turn the founders upside down, we must directly confront the constitutional structure they erected," close quote. 1985, Norman Cousins, the honorary chairman of Planetary Citizens for the World We Choose, Planetary Citizens for the World We Chose, is quoted in Human Events, quote, "World government is coming. In fact, it is inevitable. No arguments for or against it can change that fact," close quote. Cousins was also president of the World Federalist Association, an associate of the World Association for World Federation, WAWF, headquartered in Amsterdam. WAWF is a leading force for world federal government and is accredited by the UN as a non-governmental organization, or NGO. 1985, Alexei Kavylov speaks at an evening meeting held in Windstar, Colorado, about the 12th World Festival of Youth and Students, held in Moscow a few months prior to his lecture. He says, quote, "There were 3 programs. The first was political and dealt with the various issues of peace and disarmament. The second was dedicated to environmental issues, and the third to the new international economic order," close quote. 1987, The Secret Constitution and the Need for Constitutional Change is sponsored in part by the Rockefeller Foundation. Some thoughts of author Arthur S. Miller, quote, "A pervasive system of thought control exists in the United States. The citizenry is indoctrinated by employment of the mass media and the system of public education. People are told what to think about as the old order crumbles. Nationalism should be seen as a dangerous social disease. A new vision is required to plan and manage the future, a global vision that will transcend national boundaries and eliminate the poison of nationalistic solutions. A new constitution is necessary. Close quote. 1988, former Undersecretary of State and CFR member George Ball, in a January 24th interview in the New York Times, says, quote, "The Cold War should no longer be the kind of obsessive concern that it is. Neither side is going to attack the other deliberately. If we could internationalize by using the UN in conjunction with the Soviet Union, because we now no longer have to fear, in most cases, a Soviet veto, then we could begin to transform the shape of the world. It might get the UN back to doing something useful. Sooner or later, we're going to have to face restructuring our institutions so that they are not confined merely to the nation states. Start first on a regional, and ultimately you could move to a world basis," close quote. 1988, in an address to the UN, Mikhail Gorbachev calls for mutual consensus. Quote, "World progress is only possible through a search for universal human consensus as we move forward to a new world order," close quote. 1989, President Bush, speaking to the graduating class at Texas A&M University, says, quote, "Ultimately, our objective is to welcome the Soviet Union back into the world order. Perhaps the world order of the future will truly be a family of nations," close quote. 1989, Carl Bernstein's of Watergate's Woodward and Bernstein book Loyalties, A Son's Memoir, is published. His father and mother had been members of the Communist Party. Bernstein's father tells his son about the book, quote, "You're going to prove Senator Joseph McCarthy was right, because all he was saying is that the system was loaded with communists, and he was right. I'm worried about the kind of book you're going to write and about cleaning up McCarthy. The problem is that everybody said he was a liar. You're saying he was right. I agree that the party was a force in the country," close quote. 1990, President Bush calls the Gulf War an opportunity for a new world order. In an address to Congress entitled "Toward a New World Order," Mr. Bush says, quote, "This crisis in the Persian Gulf offers a rare opportunity to move toward a historic period of cooperation. Out of these troubled times, a new world order can emerge, in which the nations of the world, east and west, north and south, can prosper and live in harmony. Today, the new world is struggling to be born," close quote. 1990, in an address to the UN, Soviet Foreign Minister Edward Shevardnadze, something I can't pronounce, describes Iraq's invasion of Kuwait as, quote, "an act of terrorism that has been perpetrated against the emerging new world order," close quote. On December 31st, Gorbachev declares that the New World Order would be ushered in by the Gulf Crisis. 1990, in a UN address, President Bush speaks of the, quote, "collective strength of the world community expressed by the UN, a historic movement towards a new world order, a new partnership of nations, a time when humankind came into its own to bring about a revolution of the spirit and the mind and begin a journey into a new age," close quote. 1991, author Linda McRae Campbell publishes the book How to Start a Revolution at Your School and in Context. She promotes the use of, quote, "change agents" and as, quote unquote, "self-acknowledged revolutionaries" and, quote unquote, "co-conspirators." I'm going to say that again. 1991, author Linda McRae Campbell publishes How to Start a Revolution at Your School in Context. She promotes the use of, quote unquote, "change agents" as, quote unquote, "self-acknowledged revolutionaries" and, quote unquote, "co-conspirators." 1991, President Bush praises the New World Order in a State of the Union address. Quote, "What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind based on shared principles of the rule of law, the illumination of 1,000 points of light. The winds of change are with us now," close quote. 1991, President Bush tells the Economist Club of New York, quote, My vision of a new world order foresees a United Nations with a revitalized peacekeeping function. Close quote. 1991, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, co-sponsors an assembly called Rethinking America's Security Beyond Cold War to New World Order, which is attended by 65 prestigious members of government, labor, academia, media, military, and the professions from 9 countries. Later, several of the conference participants joined some 100 other leaders for another closed-door meeting of the Bilderberg Society in Baden-Baden, Germany. The Bilderbergers also exert considerable clout in determining the foreign policies of their respective governments. 1991, David Rockefeller, speaking at the Bilderberger meeting in Baden-Baden, Germany, also attended by then Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, states, quote, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years." Close quote. He went on to explain, quote, "It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the new world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during these years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." Close quote. 1991, the Southeastern World Affairs Institute discusses the New World Order. In a program, topics include, quote, "legal structures for a new world order," and the United Nations from its conception to a new world order, close quote. Participants include a former director of the UN's General Legal Division and a former Secretary General of International Planned Parenthood. 1991, on a cable news network program, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations member, and former CIA Director Stansfield Turner, a Rhodes Scholar, when asked about Iraq, responds, quote, "We have a much bigger objective. We've got to look at the long run here. This is an example, the situation between the United States and Iraq, where the United Nations is deliberately intruding into the sovereignty of a sovereign nation. Now this is a marvelous precedent to be used in all countries of the world," close quote. 1991, David Funderburk, former U.S. ambassador to Romania, tells a North Carolina audience, quote, "George Bush has been surrounding himself with people who believe in one world government. They believe that the Soviet system and the American system are converging," close quote. "The vehicle to bring this about," said Funderburk, "is the United Nations. Quote, "The majority of those 166 member states are socialist, atheist, and anti-American," close quote. Funderburk served as ambassador in Bucharest from 1981 to 1985, when he resigned in frustration over U.S. support of the oppressive regime of the late Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. 1991, President Gorbachev, at the Middle East peace talks in Madrid, states, quote, "We are beginning to see practical support. And this is a very significant sign of the movement towards a new era, a new age. We see both in our country and elsewhere ghosts of the old thinking. When we rid ourselves of their presence, we will be better able to move toward a new world order, relying on the relevant mechanisms of the United Nations," close quote. 1992, the book The Twilight of Sovereignty by CFR member and former Citicorp chairman Walter Wriston is published, in which he claims, quote, "A truly global economy will require compromises of national sovereignty. There is no escaping the system," close quote. 1992, Henry Kissinger, in an address to the Bilderberg Organization, meeting in Evian, France, states, quote, "Today, Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they will be grateful. This is especially true if they were told there was an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all peoples of the world will pledge with world leaders to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government. Close quote. 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, UNCED, Earth Summit takes place in Rio de Janeiro, headed by Conference Secretary General Maurice Strong. The main points of the summit are the Biodiversity Treaty and Agenda 21, which provides the full agenda for implementing global sustainable development, which the U.S. hesitates to sign because of opposition at home due to the threat to sovereignty and economics. The summit says the first world's wealth must be transferred to the third world. I'm going to run that by you again because I messed it up. The main products of this summit are the Biodiversity Treaty and Agenda 21, which provides the full agenda for implementing global sustainable development, which the U.S. hesitates to sign because of opposition at home due to the threat to sovereignty and economics. The summit says the first world's wealth must be transferred to the third world. 1992, Time magazine publishes The Birth of the Global Nation by Strobe Talbott, Rhodes Scholar, roommate of Bill Clinton at Oxford University, CFR Director, Ambassador to Russia, Trilateralist, and Assistant Secretary of State, in which he writes, quote, all countries are basically social arrangements. No matter how permanent or even sacred they may seem at any one time, in fact, they are all artificial and temporary. Perhaps national sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all, but it has taken the events in our own wondrous and terrible century to clinch the case for world government, close quote. As an editor of Time magazine, Talbott defends Clinton during his presidential campaign. President Clinton appoints him as the number 2 person at the State Department behind Secretary of State Warren Christopher, former trilateralist and former CFR, vice chairman and director. Talbott is confirmed by about 2/3 of the U.S. Senate, despite his statement about the unimportance of national sovereignty. 1992, at a town hall meeting in Los Angeles, trilateralist and former CFR President Winston Lord delivers a speech titled Changing Our Ways, America and the New World, in which he remarks, quote, to a certain extent, we're going to have to yield some of our sovereignty, which will be controversial at home. Under the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA or NAFTA, some Americans are going to be hurt as low-wage jobs are taken away, close quote. Lord becomes an Assistant Secretary of State in the Clinton administration. 1992, the CFR's magazine Foreign Affairs publishes Empowering the United Nations by UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali, who asserts, quote, it is undeniable that the centuries-old doctrine of absolute and exclusive sovereignty no longer stands. Underlying the rights of the individual and the rights of peoples is a dimension of universal sovereignty that resides in all humanity. It is a sense that increasingly finds expression in the gradual expansion of international law. In this setting, the significance of the United Nations should be evident and accepted, close quote. 1992, as a result of the Rio Earth Summit, the Earth Council is established, co-chaired by Mikhail Gorbachev and Maurice Strong. Its goal is to fulfill Agenda 21 globally. Eco-friendly Costa Rica serves as its home base. 1993, Strobe Talbott receives the Norman Cousins Global Governance Award for his 1992 Time article, The Birth of the Global Nation, and in appreciation for what he has done, quote, unquote, for the cause of global governance. President Clinton writes a letter of congratulation which states, quote, Norman Cousins worked for world peace and world government. Strobe Talbott's lifelong achievements as a voice for global harmony have earned him this recognition. He will be a worthy recipient of the Norman Cousins Global Governance Award. Best wishes for future success, Close quote. 1993, President Bill Clinton asks Vice President Al Gore to start the reinventing government process. The goal is to start public-private partnerships to transfer the responsibilities of government to businesses. 1994, Green Cross International is founded by Mikhail Gorbachev to build on the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro and Agenda 21. 1993, CFR member and trilateralist Henry Kissinger writes in the Los Angeles Times concerning NAFTA, quote, "What Congress will have before it is not a conventional trade agreement, but the architecture of a new international system, a first step toward a new world order." 1993, close quote, 1993, Christopher Hitchens, socialist friend of Bill Clinton when he was at Oxford University, says in a C-SPAN interview, quote, "It is, of course, the case that there is a ruling class in this country and that it has allies internationally," close quote. 1993, Washington Post ombudsman Richard Harwood does an op-ed piece about the role of the CFR's media members. Quote, "Their membership is an acknowledgement of their ascension into the American ruling class, where they do not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the United States, they help make it," close quote. 1994, the CFR's magazine Foreign Affairs prints an opening article by CFR senior fellow Michael Clow, in which he writes that the quote-unquote wise men, e.g. Paul Knights, Dean Acheson, George Kenman, John J. McCloy, have, quote, "assiduously guarded it," American foreign policy, "for the past 50 years. They ascended to power during World War II. This was as it should be. National security and the national interest, they argued, must transcend the special interests and passions of the people who make up America. How was this small band of Atlantic-minded internationalists able to triumph? Eastern internationalists were able to shape and staff the burgeoning foreign policy institutions. As long as the Cold War endured and nuclear Armageddon seemed only a missile away, the public was willing to tolerate such an undemocratic foreign policy-making system." Close quote. 1994, President Bill Clinton attends the Summit of the Americas in Miami. 33 heads of state came together to establish a new trade agreement that will be ratified 4 years later in 1998, known as the Free Trade Areas of the Americas. This would integrate the 33 countries of our hemisphere in the same way Europe is being integrated. 1995, the State of the World Forum is sponsored by the Gorbachev Foundation, located at the Presidio in San Francisco. Foundation President Jim Garrison chairs the meeting of who's from around the world, including Margaret Thatcher, Marie Strong, George Bush, Mikhail Gorbachev, and others. Conversation centers around the oneness of mankind and the coming global government. However, the term quote-unquote global governments is now used in place of quote-unquote New World Order, since the latter has become a political liability, being a lightning rod for opponents of global government. 1995, the NEA, National Education Association, passes a resolution at its annual conference recognizing October as Lesbian and Gay History Month. Due to public outrage, the resolution was amended. The NEA works hand in glove with Planned Parenthood and the Sex Information and Education Council of the U.S., SIECUS. Gay rights activists from an extremely powerful faction in the NEA, which promotes tolerance for homosexuality and commends gay contributions throughout history. 1996, the United Nations 420-page report, Our Global Neighborhood, is published. It outlines a plan for quote-unquote global governments, calling for an international conference on global governance in 1998 for the purpose of submitting to the world the necessary treaties and agreements for ratification by the year 2000. 1996, State of the World Forum 2 meets in San Francisco. Many of the sessions were closed to the press. 1997. During his presidency, Bill Clinton sends U.S. troops to 7 nations, promising, quote, they will be home by Christmas, close quote. Thousands more troops follow incrementally to each nation. Foreign troops continue to arrive on U.S. soil, making us more of a global village. NATO becomes the military enforcement arm of the United Nations in Bosnia, Kosovo, and other lands. The plans being implemented for a new world order are on the front page news. The plans being implemented for a new world order are on the front pages of newspapers daily, and few recognize the markers because it has become a quote-unquote business as usual mentality. The American population has been successfully lulled to sleep in 1997. Not once has Congress voted on troop deployment. 1998, the International Criminal Court is birthed in Rome, Italy, and to be located in Hague, Netherlands. For the first time in history, an international organization will have the authority to transcend national borders to arrest, try, and prosecute in a world court someone deemed an international criminal. 1999, Gloria Steinem, radical feminist, is quoted in August's Envoy magazine, quote, by the year 2000, we will, I hope, raise our children to believe in human potential and not God, close quote. 1999, Bill Clinton announces that he is thinking about setting up a quote-unquote domestic terrorism team headed by a military quote-unquote commander-in-chief with a $2.8 billion budget to combat alleged terrorism on U.S. soil. 1999, President Clinton and Vice President Gore are invited to the Panama Canal to celebrate the final lowering of the U.S. flag. The strategic waterway was given away to Panama by the Carter administration in 1978. The Panama Canal is the most important canal in the world. Certainly, United States interests are best served by our control of the canal and the canal zone. The Panama Canal is indisputably U.S. territory. So ruled the Supreme Court as early as 1907. The United States paid 4 different countries for the tract of land, a grand total of $79.7 million. Furthermore, according to the 1903 Permanent Neutrality and Operation Treaty, U.S. rights in the zone are sovereign to, quote, the entire exclusion, close quote, of Panama's rights in the area. Panama has passed a law that directly violates this important treaty and threatens the safety of the American continents. Panamanian Law Number 5 claims to grant Chinese communist-controlled Hutchison Whampoa Limited. I'm going to say it again. Panamanian Law Number 5 claims to grant Chinese communist-controlled Hutchison Whampoa Limited priority rights at both ends of the canal for the next 50 years. China, through Hutchison, will be able to occupy former U.S. defense sites in direct violation of the treaty, which specified that only Panamanian forces were to be allowed in the canal zone. Strangely, the official owners of the canal, the U.S. taxpayers, were never consulted. Congress has yet to protest. The U.S. flag is lowered December 31st, 1999. 2000. On January 20th, Senator Jesse Helms, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and first member of the U.S. Congress to ever attend the 15-member National Security Council of the UN, blasts the United Nations, quote, for imposing its presumed authority on the common people, close quote. He says, quote, the UN is aspiring to establish itself as the central authority of a new international order of global laws and global governance. This is an international order the American people will not countenance. The American people will never accept the claims of the United Nations to be the sole source of legitimacy on the use of force in the world. The United Nations that seeks to impose its presumed authority on the American people without their consent begs for confrontation and, I want to be candid, eventual U.S. withdrawal. As matters now stand, many Americans sense that the UN has greater ambitions than simply being an efficient deliverer of humanitarian aid, and a more effective peacekeeper, a better weapons inspector, and a more effective tool of great power diplomacy, close quote. Helms takes issue with the Secretary General Kofi Annan's claims for increased quote-unquote global engagement. The United Nations must respect national sovereignty and not seek to, quote, impose its utopian vision of international law on Americans. Russia responds by demanding the U.S. to pay more dues, close quote. 2000, on January 24th, 2000, Secretary of State Madeleine K. Albright states in response to Senator Helm's statement, quote, today, on behalf of the President, let me say that the Clinton administration and I believe that most Americans see our role in the world and our relationship to this organization quite differently than does Senator Helms, close quote. 2000, the People's Millennium Assembly meets in September at the UN in New York with the objective of replacing national representative government. 2000, the People's Millennium Assembly meets in September at the UN in New York with the objective of replacing national representative government. 2000, plan for January 1st, 2002, the euro currency is to replace existing currencies in Europe. Chapter 2, Masters of the Universe, loyal to no one. Those skilled in war subdue the enemy's army without battle. Sun Tzu, The Art of War, 476 BC. Weishaupt's Illuminati. The modern genesis of the new thinking and philosophy was a group called the Illuminati. It was located in Bavaria and had Masonic roots. This secret society was officially formed by Adam Weishaupt, professor of canon law at Ingolstadt University, on May 1st, 1776. As the evil plans of the Illuminati began to leak out, brave men took a stand and raised their voices in protest. One such man was John Robison, a professor of national philosophy at Edinburgh University and General Secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. In his book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, which was originally published in 1798, Robison documented how Masonry served as the nursery school for the Illuminati. It was then discovered that this group and several associated lodges were the preparation school for another order of Masons who called themselves the Illuminated. The express aim of this order was to abolish Christianity and to overturn all civil government. Weishaupt, like Rousseau before him, claimed that civilization was a mistake, that the salvation of mankind lay in a return to nature. He thought that mankind had been free and happy in this natural state, and that it was the paralyzing influence of civilization that had forced man from his natural Garden of Eden. Weishaupt claimed that the chief impediment to this natural state of harmony was the invention of the concept of property, of owning things. Rousseau theorized, quote, the first man who bethought himself of saying, this is mine, and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of civil society. What crimes, what wars, what murders, what miseries and horrors would have been spared the human race if someone would have warned, beware of listening to this impostor. You are lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to all, and the earth to no one, close quote. The essence of the illuminated one's vision is that God made a mistake. If divinity had constructed creation to be different, man wouldn't have the types of problems we see in the world. A utopia would exist. So in turn, they have sought to rebuild the world. This is the thinking of Plato, Rousseau, Hegel, and others. British historian Nesta Webster, author of the book World Revolution, observed that Rousseau's writings embodied all the principles of what would later be called communism. In what is one of the most brilliant refutations ever of the communist error in logic, Webster wrote, quote, ownership of property is not peculiar to the human race. The bird has its nest, the dog its bone, that it will savagely defend. If everything were divided up today, all would be unequal again tomorrow. One man would fritter away his share, another would double it by turning it to good account. The practical and energetic would soon be more prosperous than the idler or the wastrel. The parable of the 10 talents perfectly illustrates the differing capacity of men to deal with money. close quote. According to Weishaupt, this concept of property was the result of men giving up their nomadic life to live in a fixed residence. Therefore, the first step toward man regaining his natural, quote-unquote, liberty and equality was to renounce the notion of ownership of property and surrender his possessions. But there is no evidence that Weishaupt personally ever put this philosophy into practice. Weishaupt's theory also held that patriotism, the love of your country, and even the love of one's family had to be abolished. He taught that these allegiances should be replaced by a universal love among men and nations, which would, quote, make the human race one good and happy family, close quote. In 1921, Webster explained, quote, this is the precise language of internationalists today. And if it is, of course, easy to print out evils of exaggerated patriotism. I'm going to read this again. In 1921, Webster explained, quote, this is the precise language of internationalists today. And it is, of course, easy to point out the evils of exaggerated patriotism. But it will not be found that the man who loves his country is less able to respect foreign patriots any more than the man who loves his family is a worse neighbor than one who cares little for his wife and children. Close quote. As Webster pointed out, it is much more likely that our primitive ancestors fought barbarically among themselves with crude flint weapons than they lived in a state of quote-unquote equality and quote-unquote universal love. After all, since Cain killed Abel, murder has been tragically commonplace among men. Even the sacred Masonic Trinity, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which Weishaupt adopted for the Illuminati, contains a basic, important contradiction that fosters revolution and chaos rather than peace and harmony. Quote, it is impossible to have complete liberty and equality. The two are mutually exclusive. It is possible to have a system of complete liberty in which every man is free to behave as he pleases, to rob, to murder, to live according to the law of the jungle, rule by the strongest. There is no equality there. Or you may have a system of absolute equality, of cutting everyone down to the same dead level, of crushing all incentive in man to rise above his fellows. But there is no liberty there. Close quote. The only way to have a new world order is to totally eliminate the old world order. Only then can a new structure, a new way of thinking be introduced. The tenets of the Illuminati are summarized in the following 6 points. Number 1, abolition of monarchies and all ordered government. Number 2, abolition of private property and inheritances. Number 3, abolition of patriotism and nationalism. Number 4, abolition of family life and the institution of marriage. Number 5, communal education of children. Number 6, abolition of all religion. I'm going to read those again. The tenets of the Illuminati are summarized in the following 6 points. Number 1, abolition of monarchies and all ordered government. Number 2, abolition of private property and inheritances. Number 3, abolition of patriotism and nationalism. Number 4, abolition of family life and the institution of marriage. Number 5, communal education of children. Number 6, abolition of all religion. This shocking agenda formed a program hitherto unprecedented in all the history of civilization. Communistic theories had been held by isolated thinkers or groups of thinkers since the days of Plato, but no one, as far as we know, had ever yet seriously proposed to destroy everything for which civilization stands. Moreover, the plan of the Illuminati, as codified by the above 6 points, has continued up to the present day to form the exact program of the world revolution. With regard to government, Weishaupt felt that a republic where the citizens elect representatives to make laws for them should not be endured because it would eventually become despotic. He only tolerated the concept of a democracy because, by definition, the people could overthrow it on a whim. Weishaupt believed that people should be taught to do without any controlling authority at all, to follow no laws or any civil codes. Of course, that is what we today would call anarchy. Yet his Illuminati and the consequent governmental systems it would bring about were known for their absolute and dictatorial control. True to its revolutionary agenda, Weishaupt began his secretive conquest of Europe by attacking monarchies. Quote, "Princes and nations shall vanish from the earth," quote unquote, he said. Although much is made of the differences between the Illuminati and the Anglo-American version of Masonry today, some Masons will verify that it is not incorrect to say that their goals in this case are identical. The difference is that the case of the Illuminati, once a monarch was dethroned, and then all civil government was targeted for destruction because, in the end, anarchy and chaos, Weishaupt's idea of a quote-unquote return to nature, were their ultimate goals. For this reason, monarchies were attacked and ultimately overturned, with the French Revolution being the pilot project. Ultimately, to have a new world order, borders and sovereignty must be eliminated. The names change each generation, but the script is the same. The leaders of Masonry today would suggest that a world democracy is the form of government best suited for mankind. Granted, the difference is a technical point only, but in reality, either system results in a dictatorship. But enthusiasts of a new world order will still cling desperately to this point. The question everyone fails to ask is, who heads it? However, Weishaupt envisioned a dictatorship with himself and his Illuminati brethren at its head. But he also realized that he could accomplish nothing until he could eliminate the bedrock of civilization, religion. Thus, he taught that religion should be eliminated and replaced with the worship of reason. Quote, "In the secret schools of wisdom, through which man will be rescued from his fall, mankind will become one family, and reason will be the only law of man. When at least reason becomes the religion of man, then will the problem be solved," close quote. Quote, "To be more effective, Jesus took in the aid of religion, and in a very clever manner, he combined his secret doctrines with the popular religion. Never did any prophet lead men so easily and so securely along the road of liberty. He concealed the precious meaning and consequences of his doctrines, but fully disclosed them to a chosen few. Let us take liberty and equality as the great aim of his doctrines, and morality as the way to attain it, and everything in the New Testament will be comprehensible. Jesus will appear as the Redeemer of slaves. Man has fallen from the condition of liberty and equality, the state of pure nature. He is under subordination and civil bondage arising from the vices of man. This is the fall and original sin. The kingdom of grace is that restoration which may be brought by illumination and a just morality. This is the new birth," close quote. This concept is diabolical yet simple. The drama is in how it is being played out to the disbelief of people. This doctrine is the basis of the York Rite Masonry in general and the modern-day Knights Templar in particular. This is not to say Weishaupt invented either, but he was no doubt exposed to the code of the Templars of his day. Weishaupt insisted that he got these doctrines from Masons. Whether York or Scottish Rite, the two main branches of modern-day Masonry, members believe their craft is an improvement on Christianity. In the York Rite, only Christians can be members. In the Scottish Rite, nominal Christians are initially told that Jesus Christ was actually the quote-unquote Grand Master of their lodge. Albert Pike, Grand Commander of the Supreme Council and head of the Scottish Rite Masonry in the U.S., explained in 1871, quote, "Christianity taught the doctrine of fraternity, but repudiated that of political equality by continually inculcating obedience to Caesar and to those lawfully in authority. Masonry was the first apostle of equality. In the monastery, there is fraternity and equality, but no liberty. Masonry added that also and claimed for man the threefold heritage: liberty, equality, and fraternity, close quote. Documents exposed in later years would show how members of the Illuminati tried to develop a believable rationale that could be used to convince honest, upstanding Christians that the need for secrecy was legitimate and Christ-like. To conceal identity and to disguise intent, the leaders had all code names. Illuminatus Philo wrote this to Weishaft's closest associate, Cato, who in reality was the lawyer Herr von Zwack. Quote, Jesus Christ established no new religion. He would only set religion and reason in their ancient rites. Many therefore were called, but few were chosen. To these elect were entrusted the most important secrets, and even among them there were degrees of information. There was a 70 and there was a 12. All this was in the natural order of things, and according to the habits of the Jews, and indeed of all antiquity. The doctrines of Christianity were kept up only in hidden societies, and handed them down to posterity. Who handed them down to posterity? And they are now possessed by the genuine Freemasons, close quote. In writing to Cato, Weishaupt revealed the deception. Speaking of the new priest's degree of the Illuminati that he had just invented, Weishaupt bragged that it was such a clever imitation of Christianity that even the most dedicated clergy would be fooled. Quote, I say the Freemasonry is concealed Christianity, and as I explain things, no man need be ashamed of being a Christian. Indeed, afterwards, throw away this name and substitute reason, close quote. In the same letter, Weishaupt divulged how he was secretly laughing at those he had taken in. He poked fun at one poor Protestant minister who had attained the Illuminati's priest degree. Quote, you can't imagine what respect and curiosity my priest degree has raised. A famous Protestant divine, who is now of the order, is persuaded that the religion contained in it is the true sense of Christianity. O man, to what mayest thou not be persuaded? Who would imagine that I was to be the founder of a new religion? Close quote.